Here's why you're not the person you want to be. You've imagined your future, built routines, set goals, and tried to become more disciplined. Maybe you've even made real progress, but deep down, you still feel like the same person. The problem is that most people keep asking their current identity to design their future. They choose new goals and new routines, but they choose them from the same beliefs about who they are and what's possible for them. Because your identity is the operating system beneath every decision. Until that changes, every new habit you create is just new software running on old hardware. Over the next 20 minutes, I'm going to show you why this old identity keeps winning, how it controls what feels possible for you, and a 4-step system for making the change real. By the way, I've turned this entire training into a document that you can download and return to later. I'll link it below, but right now I want you to stay with me because the first thing we have to understand is why changing your behavior has not necessarily changed how you see yourself. At first, any kind of change is going to feel real. Maybe you've picked up new habits or new routines and you start to do it and you start to feel a little motivation because this is novel and it's new and it's exciting. But over time, the motivation fades or you fall off. And fundamentally, it feels like nothing has actually changed in your life. Because what happens is your identity is not being forced to change at all. You're just creating goals from your current self. That current self is the one saying, let's do this now. Let's do that now. But it's not fundamentally actively changing who you are. It's not your character. It's just bad design. Most people don't create goals that are designed to change how they think and who they are. There's a field of psychological research called identity-based motivation. The core idea here is that people are more likely to act when action feels congruent with who they are. So when behavior feels congruent, the effort feels meaningful. It feels like you're building towards something. But when it feels incongruent, that same effort feels like evidence that the behavior is not meant for you. An example of this is if you've ever tried to update your wardrobe or dress better, there's this discomfort at first if you're not used to it. That's because you're just trying to dress better versus becoming someone who puts effort into their appearance. There's a big difference there, but it can mean two different things as far as the difficulty goes. It's difficult because it matters, or it's difficult because I'm not this kind of person. The second one becomes much harder to change and to move through versus if this matters to me, you'll find a way through. So 2 researchers actually demonstrated this with middle school students. They wanted to see that if these students would do extra work for a project that they did not have to do based on the meaning they helped them create. What they did is they helped some of the students understand and think about the tasks they were doing and how it is associated to a future job they wanted and future incomes that they could earn. So they really helped the student paint that picture of that identity. The homework, it didn't get easier, but the students that got this connection were 8 times more likely to finish the extra work. This is not really about positive thinking or repeating affirmations and ignoring reality. It's about understanding that every action is interpreted through a story about who you are. The identity gives your behavior meaning, and the meaning gives the behavior energy. So no meaning means no fuel. And fuel is what keeps the behavior moving after the initial excitement disappears. The lens that you cannot see. This is the identity. And it's not just how you feel about yourself, it's how you see the world. And it's extremely powerful because this is how you interpret your reality. The beliefs, the stories, your self-concept, and the narratives you've repeated for years all affect what enters your awareness. If you see yourself as someone who's behind, you're constantly be scanning your day, looking for evidence of why you're behind. If you constantly tell yourself, or you have this identity that I am socially awkward, every time you get in a conversation, you're going to be noticing moments where you don't know what to say, or you feel stuck. Our identity determines the lens in which we see the world. And that means if you want to see more possibility, You fundamentally have to change what you believe about yourself and who you are. Let's go into the possibility gap. The old identity asks, what can I realistically achieve without changing too much? This is the identity that will set goals that seem ambitious, but really aren't that different. They don't change who you are. They come from that same place. They might require more work, but they don't require more courage. They don't really require discomfort. Goals that improve circumstances without challenging self-concept. So the new identity asks, what would I build if I stopped protecting the person that I've been? These are goals that require genuine courage because this is where change comes from. It comes from stepping outside that comfort zone of what even feels familiar to you. It should feel different. Like, I've never done this type of thing before. Well, that's what a new identity is. It's someone new. So the possibility gap is the space between the life you say you want and the identity that you're currently operating from. Most people try to close this gap by changing the goal, creating a better plan, choosing a new productivity system, or writing down a larger number for them to hit. And this planning feels productive because it creates this movement and this motivation without requiring your identity to change at all. You can design a completely different future without confronting the person who you are now and who will have to create it. That's the difference. If the identity underneath the plans remain the same, the new goal is still being chosen by the old self. And the old self will usually choose goals that preserve the old self. So if you think about a more confident version of yourself, they're not going to say something like, oh, I hope I get promoted in 2 years. They're going to say, like, what would I want if anything was possible for me? If I could design my life from scratch? That's the type of question in goal setting that your future self, the person you want to be, that identity, is going to think of versus just trying to add 2 times more to your life. It's trying to fundamentally change. It's trying to understand who you are. Let's talk about the mechanism behind all this, the identity loop. The identity creates predictable thoughts about who you are. The thoughts shape what feels possible and worth attempting. From those thoughts, we create goals that either shrink or expand based on our perceived possibility. From those goals, we have behavior that's either cautious or courageous, depending on the goal itself. And then from that, we get outcomes. So if you believe deep down that you're not the type of person that could build something truly meaningful, then identity creates those predictable thoughts. Who am I to do this? Or there's already too many people doing this, or I don't have the talent, or I need to learn more first. Those are the thoughts that shrink what feels possible. Then the goal becomes safer. Instead of creating your own project or creating the project, you'll research it or prepare to death. This is cautious behavior and it produces limited outcomes. And the limited outcome becomes proof. See, I knew I wasn't capable. It's that same loop over and over. If you want to break this, you have to understand that identity shapes the thoughts, the goals, and the behavior that create the outcome. The identity is first. The outcome appears to prove the identity. So let's go into the framework. Call this a lead framework because what you do day to day is going to create evidence for who you want to become. So the first thing is to locate. Find the old identity that is currently leading your decisions. Then expand. Open up what becomes possible from the new identity. Then act by expressing that new standard through visible, concrete decisions and actions. And finally, document. Review. See the evidence that is making this new identity believable. This is how identity moves from an inspiring idea to an operating system. Each step builds on the last, and together they create a loop that moves in the opposite direction from the one that's been keeping you stuck. Locate, expand, act, document. Let's go a little bit more in depth to each one. First, let's just touch on 3 misconceptions that keep most people stuck. The first is the willpower trap. This is where you don't worry about identity. You don't even think about or aren't conscious of who you are and believe that you're going to force yourself to behave differently. And this is where you start staying up late or you start grinding hard and you get on that hustle culture where You feel like if I could just get through this, I could become a different person. But that really isn't changing who you are. That's just working harder from the same identity. That is a surface layer approach. And there's the self-delusion trap where people are like, okay, so should I just pretend that I'm successful? But that's not what it is either. A new identity is not a false claim of your current results. It's a new commitment. You don't say, I am successful. You say, I am someone who creates with honesty. I am someone who speaks their mind. I am someone who leads the room. And finally, the outcome trap. People believe that they'll become who they want to be once they have the things that they want. But the better way to look at this is if you already had the things you want, who would you be? How would you act with the world? Okay, step one is to locate the old identity. And the easiest way to think about this is the patterns. Observe your patterns. Maybe you constantly procrastinate. Maybe you're someone who always clams up in conversations, but by themselves has lots of ideas that they want to express. And if this keeps happening, this is a pattern because what we're doing is we're locating the identity that is currently leading you because an identity is created through evidence. So the decisions you keep making create evidence, which create your identity. Be honest with yourself. For me, I saw myself as someone, especially in high performing in different roles, I would see myself that just wanted approval, that wanted to do a good job. So people thought I was competent at my job or whatever I did. And what I've realized is that identity that was making the decisions, I saw myself as essentially I was able to step back and see myself as a jester that was always juggling balls. And if one fell, if I didn't perform well, I'd feel bad about myself. So then I was like, all right, so I have this identity that determines his self-worth by how good I'm doing in my performance. So once you see that old identity clearly, you can ask different questions. Say, do I want this version of me creating my future? Because if you don't locate that version, right, that we just exposed is going to be setting the goal. I do want you to give yourself grace because this identity probably developed for a reason. It's your responsibility to change it and to be honest with yourself. Okay, step two is to expand what is possible. Most identity work stops way too early. You write down, I want to be confident or disciplined. And that might help for a little bit, but it's not applicable. You don't want to just change how you feel without asking what becomes possible. So you want to take the identity that you want and make it practical. Ask if I were actually the person I wanted to be, what would I now see as possible? What would I consider that I'm currently dismissing? What would I no longer tolerate for myself? What conversations would I initiate and what would I no longer need to prove? I started saying things like, all right, I trust my creative voice. Things that I'm coming up with that are sent to me or that I feel or I come up with are good enough. They're relevant. And I'm going to trust that. And by trusting that, I'm reinforcing the identity that I trust my creative voice. When you come up with these identities, for me, like I want to be a grounded and present father. What does a grounded and present father do at the maximum? If you were truly a grounded and present father, how would you operate? What does that look like? What does that identity look like if you're that person? If I say I'm socially confident in all situations, I'm a socially confident person. What becomes possible for you? You'd be able to go in any room and feel comfortable, or you'd be able to go in any room and know that it's okay to be uncomfortable. Point is, possibility is not fantasy. Possibility is a new action becoming psychologically available. The identity you choose decides which actions are available. Step three, act from the new standard. This is where things become real. It's not in the journal, not in the visualization or watching a video. It becomes real the exact moment the old identity would normally choose for you. The new identity needs decisions. Without decisions, it remains entertainment. So these are the new behaviors from the new thoughts. You want to be someone that trusts yourself as a creative? See, I create before consuming. Before opening social media in the morning, create for 20 minutes. I communicate directly. When something matters, I'll say a clear sentence instead of hoping the other person notices. People often imagine identity transformation as one dramatic moment. The new self arriving with certainty and a complete absence of fear. The new identity often appears with a hesitation. The old identity says, don't do this. This isn't you. People are going to look at you, right? But the new identity says, this is what I need to say. This is authentic to me. The new identity will not always feel that strong because it's less familiar. And we often confuse what's familiar with the truth. Your old identity has history, but your new identity needs rest. This is how you practice aligning with that new self. So step 4 is to document the proof. The reality is how you feel about yourself is based on the years of evidence that's collected, the things you've done, the memories you've created, and the repeated stories. Your new identity, if you want to change who you are and how you feel about yourself and what you believe is possible, you need evidence to make it believable. Your brain sees what you do. And if what you do is proof for a new identity, you become that person. So at the end of each day, ask, where did this new version of me lead today? What did I do differently? And what did I tolerate less? What uncomfortable action did I stay with? Keep the proof small and specific because the brain has a hard time dismissing actual receipts and evidence of the person that you want to become. So instead of saying I was confident, collect and say and remember that you stated your opinion without trying to soften it. Instead of saying I was disciplined, remember how you started before you felt ready. Specific proof has weight. Vague promises do not. No feedback means no fuel, and fuel is what keeps the new identity long enough to become familiar until one day the new behavior is the one that arrives automatically without even have to think about it. Not only are you learning new behavior, you're going against the grain of something you've always done. You're breaking your own rules. The old identity will say things like, we don't do that. We're not ready. We don't push ourselves forward like this. We don't take that kind of risk. Then you act differently. And even when the action goes well, that part of you is going to pull you back to a retreat. It's going to think, oh man, that felt fake. I'm trying too hard. This is cringe. Man, how are people going to think of me if this doesn't go well? External approval. But alignment is, wow, getting through this really shows the person that I'm trying to become. There's risk here, but it's driven by an internal standard. This may look similar from the outside, but internally they are opposite. Becoming is uncomfortable because every new action creates tension between your history and your direction. The tension is not proof that you're wrong. It is proof that you're stretching beyond your established pattern. You're not waiting to feel like a new person. You're allowing the new person to accumulate history. So the big question here, this is the close, is what becomes possible when you change who you are? First, these changes are going to look small. You start dressing how you want to dress. You start stating your opinion authentically, and it's like, man, cool. I'm really saying what I want. You stop apologizing for every preference or seeking approval. But these aren't isolated. They're forming an identity that's going to widen your world. You discover the boundary that you have of who you thought you were is no longer there. And it was self-created. So it's something that you could expand. And when you ask, what's possible if I change who I am? More honest goals become possible for you. You could say, all right, if I really was living the life that was totally aligned and I could have anything that I want, what would that be? What would that person who had everything that he wanted in his life create or do? How would he treat others? Because the old identity asks, what can I safely guarantee? The new identity asks, what am I willing to discover? A different life is built by a different version of you, making different decisions. Not one giant decision, different decisions repeated until they become evidence. Evidence repeated until it becomes identity. Identity repeated until the world begins responding to you differently. Your future self is not an imaginary person waiting for you somewhere in the distance. It is the version of you that is available in your next decision. Do not only ask, what goal should I set? Ask, who is setting the goal? Then give that identity a life to lead. Hey, thank you again for watching. Just want to remind you that this full resource is available in the link below, along with all the other visual resources and reflection prompts to other videos. Thanks again for watching. Talk to you soon.